Alright, so thanks for tuning in again. This week I'm going to cover Chapter 12 out of the Adobe Photoshop Classroom in a book, and it's on working with Camera Raw. So before we get started, we want to check out some of the images that are included with this lesson. And it's actually lesson 12 we're working on. So I want to go up to Files and browse in Bridge here. And this is going to open up Bridge so I can look through there and find the files that I want. So with Bridge open here, I can go to my Lessons folder, and I want to slide my slider on over until I get to Lesson 12, and then just go ahead and double click on that folder to open that up. And we see that we have a few photos here, and we want to look at these two first. So all I'm doing is clicking on one, holding down the shift click on the other. And so this is our start image that we're going to start with, and you see that's the CRW, and that's Camera Raw for Canon cameras. And we're going to make some adjustments to make that image pop like this image here. Now our second image we're going to start with is this one here, and again hold down my shift and clicking on the second image gives a side-by-side comparison. And this is the end image, which is what we're going to again make it look like. We're going to pop up the whites, do some color saturation, and just work on this image a little bit to make it a little sharper and brighter and more appealing. Alright, so for the first part of this lesson, what we want to do is open up the mission folder here, and I'm going to double click on that. And you can see that we have three different images here. The first one that we just looked at there, and this one, and this one. So what I'm going to do is hold down shift and click on all three of them. So if you just click on the first one and go to the last one and hold down shift click, that will open up all three. Another way of doing that is clicking on the first one, holding down command or control, and clicking on each individual one to open them. Once you have all three of them selected, what you want to do is go up to the top, and you want to open with Adobe, open in Adobe Camera Raw, I should say, or Control R. So this is going to bring up our images, and you see that my film strip is along the bottom. Yours could be along the side here, but my film strip is across the bottom here, and you see that our three images are opened up here. And there are different ways of looking at that. Let me see if I can widen this a little bit, just to give you a little better view of this. So depending on the version that you have, you could have these could be across the top there, or in different locations, but all of my tabs here, all of the stuff that I can work with, various quick menu items for these images are along the top here. And generally we have these tabs right here are what you want to work in order with. So as this goes down, you can see that we have edit here, we have curves, we have detail, color mixing, split toning, optics, geometry, effects, and calibration. Now this is the newer updated version here, so that's why this may look a little different than what you see in the book, or what you may have if you don't have the latest edition or the latest update on Adobe, which is not a bad thing. But in most cases you want to work from the top down. You want to do all of your stuff in this menu here. Then you can open up the curves menu, and you can close down the basic menu here. You can see that you can close it down. We also have the profile. We have edit, which will give you auto and black and white, so that you can click on auto and it's going to do its best to try and fix the image, which you saw that it did there. But the basic where you're going to work on a lot, you're going to eventually learn how to use curves, which is a very dynamic way of adjusting an image. And a lot of people either like curves or they like the sliders, one or the other, it seems like. In the detail, we can sharpen and do some noise reduction, which is important for almost all images. Color mixing, we can change the way that the color mixer looks, but you want to change different colors or highlight different colors. Like in other words, the blue here, we can change the hue of the sky and the blue there, so it just affects one color. And to reset, you just double click right towards the center here, and that will reset it back. Split toning allows you to adjust the highlights and the shadows independent of each other. Optics allows you to use profile corrections, defringe, adjust the color out of areas that chromatic aberrations. You can get rid of the color along the edge as the color changes from one end to the other. You get some noise and then you get that color. You also have manual control here where you can distort and vignette an image, and you can see that we can change the way that that image looks. Geometry allows you to make images that are kind of messed up, like when you take an image of a building and it's sort of peeking towards the top. When you do it with a wide angle lens, you can adjust the geometry here. And sorry, I went back to optics to go completely to zero from what I had changed. So there are other things. I don't think we'll get in that too much in this chapter. Effects, grain, and vignetting are the two main ones here in these effects. And then calibration allows you to adjust, and you can set up the processes, your shadows, red primaries, green primaries, blue primaries, how you like them to look when they come in, and calibrate them to export out. So all of these things are in Camera Raw, and what we do in Camera Raw is going to be separate than what we're going to do in Photoshop. But first we're going to work in Camera Raw to get the images overall looking good before we bring them into Photoshop and do something else with them. Or sometimes you just might edit an image strictly in Camera Raw. Now, because we have all of these tabs here, doesn't mean that you have to use all of them, so just keep that in mind. Now we do have some profiles to make adjustments a little bit easier, and if you see, we have Adobe Color here, and we have Adobe Landscape. So when I click on that, you see that that's going to change it just a little bit, and you notice that some of these numbers will move over also. Adobe Portrait, which is good for photographing people when you're photographing somebody. Landscape emphasizes blues and browns in the colors. Adobe Standards is the general profile, and again, these profiles are laid across the top of the image. The image itself is not messed up in any way so far. Here's Vivid, which just emphasizes all the colors. And then you have a monochrome, changes to black and white, so that makes it rather easy. And then you have Browse for other functions there. We're just going to go back up to Adobe Color, which is the standard look of the image when we're in the program. Now, one of our first adjustments that we want to make is generally white balance. And so the camera, when it photographs something, it can take a picture of something and it sort of gives you the white balance that it is. It just sort of has shot. It's very neutral. But if you go down through here, you can see that you have different ones that you can pick from. So if we click on Cloudy, you see that the temperature changed a little bit. And notice these two lines right here. So if I click on Daylight, that's going to again move over and change. And if I click Tungsten, that's also going to change it quite a bit and add a lot more blue. You see the temperature goes over a lot to the blue area. So Daylight is probably what this is, but I think the book tells you to click on Cloudy so that you can see the way it is. And it still has a little bit of a blue cast to it. So one of the things that we can do is we can adjust that white balance. Now right over here is the white balance tool, and this may be in a different location than on yours, because again there are some updates that just recently came out. So when you click on that tool and you bring it over, you have this eyedropper, and wherever you place that eyedropper is what you're telling Photoshop that you want this area to be pure white. So like if we click on this cloud here, we can see that it changed the image just a tiny bit. If I click on a different part of the cloud, it changes the image again. And so it can keep changing the image. Now I'm going to do something just drastic. Click over here, and you see that that drastically changes because it tries to make it a neutral white. Up here, that sort of gives us a little bit closer to the image that we want. So the idea with this eyedropper is to click it on a part of an image that is going to make that part of the image white, and then everything else will fall in line. So Adobe will adjust all of the other color parameters of the different colors where they should be in relationship to that one that you picked white. And in this case, we're going to go down here to this sign here and click on the white part of the sign, because we know that that sign should be white. And so then this theoretically has given us the correct white balance for our image. Now the other thing we have options of is down here you have a couple of different options. Here, if you hold on there, you can cycle between the before and after view. So if I click, you can see that we have one up, this is the after view and this is the before, so you can see the difference. You also have a couple different setups here: swap before and after on the side, current, and toggle to the default settings. So sometimes you may want to work in this view because it's much easier to see what is being done as you're doing it compared to the original image. But that's entirely a personal choice. I like just to work on the image, but if you want to see both of them, you can. And again, as we cycle through here, you can see that we get before and after in different locations. But decide which way you want to work. But I generally work with just the one picture, and that's what you're going to see throughout the rest of the tutorial. Now, one of the things that you can do is you can go ahead and just click on auto underneath the edit here. And this auto, when you click on that, will automatically set it to what Adobe feels is the proper setting. But your book does want you to adjust these, and you'll notice that when I click on and off auto, you see that there's some adjustments made here, and they're quite some significant adjustments too. So the book has some settings for you, and let's just go through those. So the exposure is 0.50. Oops, my mistake, I forgot the point. 0.50. And again, I'm just highlighting these. I'm just clicking on the inside of this box and typing in the exposures that I want. So the contrast we're going to leave the same. The highlights we want to go to -20, and that's going to bring down our bright areas there. The shadows here we're looking at +70, so just type in 70. And you can also move this on over till you get to 70. Sometimes I find that difficult to do. Of course, I did it right there right away. But you can definitely just move the sliders. And in honesty, when you're doing your own images, you're most likely going to be sliding the sliders back and forth. You're not going to have numbers to enter right away because these numbers won't work on all images. For the whites, we're going to put 20. So we're going to pop up the whites a little bit, brighten up the whites in here. And for the blacks, we're going to go ahead and give that a -10. So we're going to bring the blacks down. So what we're basically doing is when we bring the whites up brighter and the blacks down lower, we're increasing the contrast on it. Now come down to clarity here, and clarity helps sharpen the image a little bit. It gives you a little more clarity in the midtones, and we're going to add 20 to that. And then vibrance, we're also going to add 20 to that. We're going to give that a 20. And again, that's going to bring up the color. So you see that when it's down here, as I bring the vibrance up, and I'm just going to overdo it, the vibrance is going to bring up the color. Now the difference between the vibrance, and I'm just going to touch on this real quick, and saturation is that saturation brings up all of the colors. So it saturates all the colors, where vibrance will saturate the colors that are not quite as saturated to begin with. So vibrance is really good for people and landscape. Now, the book doesn't talk about this one here, dehaze, too much, but I guarantee you once you start using dehaze, that generally will be the first one that you will make an adjustment for on landscapes. Then you'll go back and work through the rest of them. Okay, so we're going to sharpen up this image a little bit, which is generally what you have to do for almost all images. So to get my zoom tool, I'm going to press Z, and you'll see that my little cursor here changes to a magnifying glass. And we're going to zoom in up top here. Now, the most it's allowing me to go is 100%, but let's see if we can go maybe 300% here. There we go. And now I'm going to hold down my space bar and just drag this down so I can see my little cross up here. Now I'm going to come over here to the basic, and I'm going to close that up, and I'm going to open up the detail. And detail has three different things: as sharpening, noise reduction, and color noise reduction on it. Now inside each one of these, you see that they have a little arrow over here, and they have a drop down arrow here, and we have noise reduction as drop down and color noise reduction as drop down. In the book, we're just going to basically work with the sharpening. Now the sharpening, this is the amount of sharpening that allows it to go onto the image, and what it does is it looks for an edge, and it sharpens the pixels around that. So if we bring this on up all the way to 100, we over sharpen it here, and pretty close to 100 there it is. And you see that when we look at the sky gets rather pixelated because we're sharpening everything. So the other thing we look at is the radius, how far out doesn't want to go from that sharp area. Right now we have it set up to where it goes 1 pixel out, which is sort of creating this pixelation around here. So most of the time you want the radius to be under 1 pixel. Now in this case for the book it's just going to be 0.9. It's not going to be much under, but it is going to be under. And in the detail, the book wants you to put 25 as not already on it, which is the standard number. Now masking here, what masking does is masking takes and blocks out any areas for sharpening that are not a sharp area. So the best way to do that is visualize it. So I'm going to hold down the Alt or Option, and as I drag the masking over, you see that it starts to appear. Now everything that is in black is what it's going to sharpen. So as I bring the masking over, you see that right now it's going to sharpen some of the sky and around my building quite a bit. As I bring this over, it refines it down, and even I can get it to where it doesn't even affect the sky anymore. And you see that we start getting gaps on the building if I go too far over. So I'm going to bring that back just a little bit, make sure that all of my building has a white outline to it, and just leave it there. And now when you look at the sky, you see the sky doesn't have the pixelation, but if you look along the edge right here, and let me see if I can bring this up maybe a little bit more. You see along the edge here, you see that we have this pixelation right along here. And that's because it's only affecting this area right here. It's not affecting the sky. You can see the sky still looks pretty smooth even at this high magnification, but we do get pixelation here. So what we're going to do is we're going to drop the sharpening down to about 70%, I believe the book says. Yeah, to right around 70%. And you see that there's quite a difference between the pixelation there and the pixelation higher up. So you can see that that comes down quite a bit. So at 70% we're going to leave it there, and we're going to go ahead and zoom out a little bit here and zoom in. I'm going to go back up to the top here and set it to 200%. There we are. And so that looks pretty good. The sharpening looks pretty good on that, and that's where we're going to leave that. So what we have now is this image, which looks pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom back out. And we want to, instead of redoing these on all of these other images, because they were all shot at the same time, we just want to transfer this information on over to all of these other images here in the film strip. So what I'm going to do is click on these 3 little dots here and select all, so that all these images are selected. And now when I click on this 3 little dot here, I want to go ahead and put sync settings, and we'll click on that. And you see that we have this synchronized box come up, and it has all of them checked here except for crop, aspect ratio, special ones down here. But what that means is that whatever you have over in this area is going to be transferred onto these pictures. So even though we didn't adjust all of them, we can just go ahead and leave them all checked and click OK. And once we click OK, you see that these pictures all adjusted up. So I can go ahead and click on these different images here, and we can look at them. So we can just scroll through and see that all of them have indeed been updated to the finished result that we did on our first one. So what we're going to do now is save all of these images here. So again, I'm going to go down here to my 3 dots and select all. And then from the 3 dots again, I'm going to put save image. And we have these save options come up here, and they're a little bit different, but we're going to go through each one of them so they look about the same, or they match up with the book as close as possible. So we want to save them in the same location. If you want to change that folder, you would select folder here and change it, but we have it going to the same location. We can save them as the same document. That's okay. And our file extension, which is going to make it what image type it's going to be, we're going to select JPEG from that. And then quality, we want to make sure that that is on high, which is what it is. And then you want to save them, I believe we want to save them in sRGB. So just go down to sRGB. I'm never going to get that right. And we'll click on that. And 8-bit, that's okay, you can leave it there. Sometimes you want to save it as more, but when we're saving it for the web, we're saving it that. Now we want to resize it to fit, and we want to select the long side. And then once you select the long side, we're going to go ahead and type in 800 pixels. And what that's going to do is that's going to automatically proportion the short side of the image. So it'll save the long side, whether it's a vertical or a horizontal shot, it will save the long side 800 pixels and adjust the other side to where it should be. And because we're going on the web on it, we're going to save it at 72 pixels per inch. And that's about it. And we'll press save, and now it will save the images. So when we go over to Bridge, when we look in Bridge, we'll see that we have 3 mission photos there in our folder. Alright, so the next thing we want to do is we just want to click on this single image here, and we're actually going to save that to Photoshop. So down here we have open, and we have open as an object, open as a copy. Now when you select open, it will open it as a regular JPEG image, but when you select open as an object, it's going to open it as a smart object. And so we'll just click on that, and you see now that this is opened up in Photoshop. Let me get off my text tool, and over here we have a smart object little diagram here and a smart object thumbnail. So what it will do is when I double click on this, this allows me to go back to Camera Raw and make future adjustments. Now if I did not save it as an object, if I just saved it and opened it, or if I just opened it in Photoshop, it wouldn't have that smart object there, and I wouldn't be able to go back to Camera Raw. Now, I could use the smart object filter here. I could go up here and use Camera Raw filter, but that is a little bit different than going back to Camera Raw where you originally were, because it doesn't retain all of the other information. You see that when I double click on Camera Raw here, when I go back, it has all of my information saved here and exactly where I left this image. Here in Photoshop now, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and just save this image, and I'm going to click Save As, and it should take me to my Lesson 12 folder, but it may not, so we'll just find my Lesson 12 folder here on Desktop and Lessons and Lesson 12, and go over to Mission. And what I'm going to do is save this as Finish Mission 3, or Final. Final will work. Mission 3, and save that. And what that allows me to do is come back and work on this in Photoshop. Okay, so again, we're going to go back to Adobe Bridge, and because I have it open, I'm just going to click on it right down here. And I want to go back to Lesson 12 folder, and I'm going to select this image here of this bride. We're going to select the start image of the bride, and we're going to do some color correction on her and fix this image up, although it's a very nice image as is, but we will be changing it around a little bit. So in Adobe Bridge, we're going to go to File, and we're going to go to Open in Camera Raw, or we can put Command R. So I'm going to click on Open in Camera Raw. And the first thing we want to do, and I'm going to close down this detail just so we don't get a little confused here. The first thing we want to do is open up the Basic menu again. And I want to correct the white balance on her because there is a slight color cast. So I'm going to do just like we did before. We're going to select this color tone picker and pick a white spot on her dress and adjust that so that the image looks good. And the other thing I want to do is I want to increase the exposure by 0.30. And again, you'd be using the sliders for this most of the time for your image, but because the book already has numbers, that's what we're going to use. So we're going to type in 15, and the clarity we're going to go up to 8. So I'm just going to adjust that up to about 8, right about there. And so once I have that image done, I want to open that object. Now notice down here that it says open, and notice that when I press the shift, that it changes to open object. Now the other thing you do is you have this drop down menu. You can open has an object there, or you can just press the shift, hold the shift, and click on that, and so that's going to bring it into Photoshop as a smart object again. And again, this allows me to double click on it and go back into Adobe Raw if I should need to. Okay, so here in Photoshop, we're going to adjust the levels on this image. And to do that, I'm going to click on Add an Adjustment Level here. And we see, let me see if I can, I guess I can't bring that any bigger. So this button right here will allow us to calculate a more accurate histogram, although we have a pretty accurate one here. But most of the time the histogram you want the blacks to go right to the edge on this side and the whites to go to the edge on that side. Now I'm going to go ahead and click on the more accurate histogram. That's going to give us a little better reading. And I don't know if you can see it. Maybe you can see it better in this one. But and let me just drop this. Let me see if I can drop this down a little bit. Alright, so I'm just going to leave that alone. Put that back up there. So we have this little bump right here which we want to get rid of because most of the information starts right at this point right here. So I'm going to drag this to the left a little bit, and you see that our image immediately changes a little bit. You see that it's a little darker and it's getting a little bit lighter, so I just want to bring it right about to the edge on that point right there. And I think the book ends up at 242. I'm at 248, so I'll go a little bit more. And I'm at 243. I'm going to leave it there. And then you want to adjust this over just a little bit, make it a little bit darker, about 90. And as you can see, it's very touchy, so I'm going to just double click in there and put 0.90. That way I have it exactly as the book has it. And so now we've made our levels adjustment and actually made that image pop a little bit more. We've added a slight bit of contrast and we've brought down the highlights a little bit. Okay, so with that adjustment made, what we want to do is we've added some red into her because levels just lightens and darkens. And so we want to bring that out a little bit. So because we have this as a smart object, what I can do is I can double click on that and open this image back up into Camera Raw, where I can make some adjustments here. So I'm going to close up the basics here and I'm going to go down to Color Mixer. And I want to make sure that's on HSL, Hue, Saturation, and Luminance. And then I also want to make sure that I'm on the Saturation tab here, not the Hue tab, but the Saturation tab right here. And then we're going to make the following adjustments. So the red, we're going to put -2 because we want to get rid of some of that red in the image. And the oranges, we're going to put a -10 because again, we want to get rid of the reds, but there are a lot of oranges in the skin. And there's just a little bit of magenta also, so we're going to put a -3 on that. And again, if this was your own picture, you'd be adjusting these sliders. You'd be adjusting these sliders to make your image look the way that you want it to look. And once I have those inputs into Camera Raw, I'm gonna click OK and come back into Photoshop. So again, you can see that we're working in two different areas here, going back and forth to adjust our image the way that we want it to look. In our case, the way that the book wants it to look. So in Photoshop, what we want to do is we want to use the healing brush on our picture here. But you can't use a lot of these tools on a smart object. So what you have to do is you have to create a new layer. So I'm going to right click on this layer and put duplicate layer. And for this one, we'll put correction. Corrections and click OK. And you see that drops up above. And what we want to do is we want to do what's called rasterizing this image here. And I'm going to right click on it and go down to rasterize layer and click on that. Now it's just a regular layer in Photoshop, but it still has all the corrections that we made in Photoshop and in Camera Raw before. But now it's going to allow me to make some corrections on it. So coming over here to my panel, I want to my spot healing brush tool, which when I left click and hold down, I can see that on my patch tool, if that happens to be the top one, because that was the one I used last. I go over here to spot healing brush, and now that one is my main brush here. And I think we have some parameters to set that up with. So when we drop this down, or this menu right here, we want it to be at 35 pixels roughly, and leave the hardness the same. And mode we want normal, and type we want to make sure that it does say content aware. We want to click on that. We want to make sure that that's clicked. And then we're ready to brush. Now, if you had placed another layer above this to work on that layer by itself, like a blank layer, you want to make sure that sample all layers was selected. But because we're going to work on this correction layer itself, we don't need that selected. What I want to do is I want to zoom in. So I'm going to hold down my Z key to zoom in a little bit on the face there, and then go back to my spot healing brush. And I want to get rid of this nose ring. So I'm going to click on that, and you see that it's going to select pixels around the area. Now it's got a little bit of a dark area there, and I'm just going to adjust that, and that looks good. And then we can also drag over an area. And what the spot healing brush does is it takes pixels from the surrounding area to fill in any spots or lines that you happen to cover up. And what it does is it blends the texture and the color from the surrounding area somewhere that's close. But on larger things, such as on the face here, we want to get rid of some of these molds here. We're going to need a little bit of a different tool to sample from a different part of the image. So we're going to come on over here and select the healing brush tool. Now before you can use this tool here, you actually need to select an area that you're going to use for it. So what I want to do is I want to make this up to 45 pixels, and then I want the hardness to be at 100%, and the spacing at 25 is fine. Everything else is fine underneath there. Let me get off that. And so what it tells you is, like when I first click on something, you see it says option click to define a source point, because we have to tell it what we want it to select from. So in this case, we're going to remove this mold here. So I'm going to select an area like close to it, like that has the same type of skin that I want to replace it with. I'm going to hold down my Alt key, and you see that my cursor becomes this target. And I'm going to left click to select that. And so now when I come over here, you see that that automatically disappears because it gives me a preview. And I'm going to click on that, and that will get rid of that particular mold right there, pulling from this area right here to basically overlay it on top of there. And you can go around and do other areas here the same way. Notice that when I move it, like if I move it over here, you can see that because it's still selecting from this point right here, it would actually bring my skin over onto a lip, which is not what we want to do, obviously. So the healing brush we'd use for larger things to correct on our image. Now, you do want to leave some of the facial features on people. You don't want to like get their skin glass smooth and everything where they don't look the way that they actually look. So although we're changing some of it on here, you do want to use this with discretion and not overdo it on somebody's face. Okay, so we're going to do a couple things to adjust her eyes here, and again we're on the correction layer, and I'm going to hold down my Z key and just zoom in a little bit more on her eyes so we can see what we're doing here. And I'm going to come on over here, and underneath my dodge tool or worm tool, I'm going to select the sponge tool. And once I have the sponge tool, I'm going to set my brush size to 35 pixels. Make the brush a little bit smaller. Brush hardness I'm going to leave at 0. And in the mode here, we're going to go ahead and click on saturated. Now you can desaturate with the sponge or saturate. We're going to go with saturate. And we're going to leave the flow at 50%. And we're going to take this sponge and we're going to just click, left click, and drag it over the eye and go around the circle a couple times. And you'll see that as you do this, it intensifies the color of the irises here. So you don't want to do it too many times, but a couple here just to intensify that. Okay, so we're going to use the same tool, and we're actually going to change the size of it to 45. I'll just drag it on up here to roughly 45, and we'll keep the hardness at about the same, and make sure our flow is still at 50% here. And what we're going to do is we're going to drag it on over the lips here to saturate the lips a little bit. And you know, don't get too crazily carried away on here, but we're just saturating that color on the lips here. And there we go. and you get too crazy and it's going to look unnatural. Okay, like I said, we can use the sponge to desaturate also. So we're going to change the brush size to 45, or roughly 45. And over here in saturate, we're going to put desaturate. Now the reason that we're going to do that is we're going to get rid of some of these red spots in the eyes here, the red lines. So again, I'm just dragging slowly over the eyes and desaturating a little bit, and I think I desaturated this eye just a little bit too much because that's kind of gray. So I'm going to go ahead and bring back the saturation at least one pass. There we go, just like that. And one more time here with the desaturation right in the corner. Just a little bit. There we are. And that looks good. Now next thing we're going to do is we're going to use the dodge tool, which is underneath our brush tool here. And again, I'm going to select the dodge tool. And I'm going to go ahead and set it for 60 pixels, exposure 10%. And bring down my exposure to 10% because I just want this to work rather slowly. And what we're going to do is just go over the eyes a couple times just to brighten them up. Just like that. And again, these are very small changes, but I'm going to bring up the highlights too. Select highlights from my menu, and you can see that it instantly brings those whites up quite a bit. Now with the dodge tool still selected, what we're going to do is we're going to come up here to the range and click on the shadows, and we're going to go ahead and lighten up these shadows that are right underneath her eyebrow here. And all that's doing is just making our eyes pop out a little bit more without changing much of anything. Okay, so I want to go ahead and zoom out on this face. So I'm going to hold down my Z key, press my Alt Option button, it becomes a minus, and zoom back out to a full-size image. And what I want to do is I want to make a selection of her face and remove some of that red that we have in there. So I'm going to go up to select, and I'm going to go up to color range and select color range. And from that, I'm going to take this drop down menu and go to skin tones. And then once we have the skin tones, you see what is selected here by the lighter part. And I'm going to click on it to tell it to detect face. And so now that's going to bring in the face. It still has some of the dress here selected. And to get rid of that, you bring the fuzziness down. And the fuzziness allows it to make some adjustments so that, and I'm just trying to get it to the, it's kind of slow moving because it's so much program demanding. So I'm just going to type in 10% here, 10 on the fuzziness, and you see now that our dress is gone. It has mostly our skin, some of the hair is there, but that's okay. So with this color range selector here and this fuzziness selected for the face, I'm going to press OK. And you're going to see that we have marching ants around here for our face selection. And that's just, although it's selecting other things, it's mainly on the face, which is what we want. And you can refine that a little bit more if you want, but for this, we're going to be okay. Now I want to transfer this onto a adjustment that I can adjust out the reds, and I'm going to select the curves. And when I click on the curve, you'll notice that the curve panel property comes up, our marching ants disappear, but notice that our mask here is created from the selection of that color range. So under RGB here, I'm going to take the drop down, I'm going to select only the red because I only want the reds to be selected, and I'm going to grab in the center of this diagonal line and just pull it down just a little bit to get rid of those reds in that picture. And if you want to see the difference, you can click on and off the eyeball to see the red. Now it's just a very slight there. I might be able to go a little bit more, so let's see if I drag a little bit more. Now if you start going too far, you start getting this green. I'm just going far just to show you this green that can come in there, which is what you do not want. You just want to skirt that fine line between too much red and no green, which I think I have right there. Okay, so for a final touch, we're going to add a little bit of blur to the skin just to smooth it out some. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that my correction layer is selected here, and I'm going to right click and duplicate that layer, and I want to name that layer Surface Blur, and click OK. So now I have this layer that has all of this correction done below, and then these are applied to that layer also. Now we're going to go up to Filter, we're going to go down to Blur, and go down to Surface Blur, and click on that. So what I want to do is I want to have it at 5 pixels, leave it there, and then my threshold, we're going to change that to 10, and click OK. Now that added quite a bit of blur. I mean, it's not a huge difference, but it is a little glassy there. So what we're going to do is we're going to reduce the layer down to about 40% opacity. So I'm just going to type in 40% to make that a little quicker. 40%. And so now we're letting some of this correction layer on through. But in addition to that, I want the eyes to be sharp, and I want the lips to be sharp, and the eyebrows. Certain things on the face I want to be sharp. So for that, we're going to go on over to the eraser tool, which is right here, and I'm going to select the eraser tool. And for this, I'm going to bring down my brush size. Now I'm just reducing the brush size by clicking my left and right brackets next to the P key. The left one makes it smaller, the right one makes it larger. So I guess that would be the open bracket and the closed bracket, or the closed bracket and open bracket. Yes, closed bracket, open bracket. So, and all I'm going to do is just drag across the eyebrows right here with this brush. So once I have my brush tool, I want to make sure that I want to have it so that it is about 50 pixels, between 10 and 50 pixels, and I want 10% hardness. 10% hardness, and I want the opacity at about 90%. So I'm just going to type in 90% right there. That's good. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag it above the eyebrows here and around the eyes. So what we're doing is we're letting the sharpness come on through from the other layer onto these parts that we want sharp. And we want the skin to be a little smoother, but we want all the rest of this to be sharp. Now what we're basically doing is erasing from this layer. So you can see that if I just select this layer, you can see that we've erased these parts around her eyes, above her eyebrows, and her lips right there, and we only have an opacity of 40% on that layer. So that's what that layer is doing. And now we have a finished model. So you can come on up here, and first off, you can, if you want, you can flatten it to make this much smaller. Most of the time, all I do is I just go up to Save As and save as a JPEG for it, because and what I can do is type in Finish and select JPEG, click on that and save that, and save it into the same file. And 6 medium is fine for what I want it for. And then of course I also want to save it as a Photoshop file, and we have it as Start right now. So what I'm going to do is go up to File and Save As, because I want to, if I ever want to come back and change anything or fix this a little bit, I can. I want to save it as a Photoshop file, and I'm going to put Finish. And that way it's going to save it as a Photoshop file also, because it's different file type than the JPEG that we just saved. Even if I use the same name, it's not going to save over top of it. And so now I have the Photoshop file and the JPEG file together. So that pretty much takes care of that chapter, and hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like and subscribe, and join me on the next one, where chapter 13 we're going to prepare files for the web.